If you are over 55 and have no savings, the first thing you probably feel is not just fear. It's a quiet sense that maybe it's too late to change anything. And that thought alone is more dangerous than the lack of money itself, because it creates a kind of resignation, a subtle acceptance that this is just how life turned out. But what Buddhist philosophy teaches is something very different. It teaches that what you are experiencing right now is not the end of your story, but the result of patterns that have been repeating for years without awareness. Most people don't consciously choose their financial situation. They slowly build it through habits, decisions, emotional reactions, and unconscious behaviors that accumulate over time. Spending to relieve stress, avoiding discomfort, saying yes when they should say no, ignoring numbers they don't want to face. None of this feels dramatic in the moment, but over decades, it creates a reality that seems impossible to escape. And this is where the real problem begins, because once you believe your situation is fixed, you stop observing it. You stop questioning it. You stop interrupting the patterns that created it. In Buddhism, this is called ignorance, not a lack of intelligence, but a lack of clear seeing. You are living inside a system you never fully examined. But here is the shift that changes everything. If your current life was built through repetition, it can also be rebuilt through repetition. Not in years, not in some distant future, but starting with something much smaller and much more immediate. A conscious interruption of your current patterns. This is where the rule of 7 days comes in. It is not a miracle, it is not a shortcut, and it is not designed to make you rich in a week. What it does is far more important. It forces you to wake up. It forces you to see clearly, to act differently, and to break the automatic cycle that has been running your life for decades. And once that awareness begins, something unexpected happens. Your age stops feeling like a limitation and starts feeling like urgency. You begin to understand that you don't need to fix your entire life at once. You need to change the direction. Because the moment direction changes, even slightly, the future is no longer a continuation of the past. And that is where real transformation begins. Not when everything is solved, but when you finally stop drifting and start deciding. One of the most painful feelings a person can experience, especially later in life, is the sense of having nothing. It feels like you worked for years, gave your time, your energy, your health, and somehow ended up with almost no security. But what Buddhist philosophy invites you to question is whether this lack is only financial, or if it actually begins much deeper in the way the mind relates to money, control, and responsibility. Because scarcity is not always created by how much you earn. Very often, it is created by how you perceive, react, and decide. In Buddhism, there is a concept that explains much of human suffering: attachment combined with unconscious behavior. People don't just spend money, they use money emotionally. They spend to relieve anxiety, to escape frustration, to feel temporary comfort in a life that feels heavy. And over time, this creates a pattern where money is not managed consciously, but released impulsively, almost automatically. This is why many people reach a point in life where they feel like money simply disappears. Not because it literally vanishes, but because it was never fully observed. Small expenses, repeated daily, become invisible. Subscriptions are forgotten. Habits are justified. And the mind protects itself from discomfort by avoiding looking too closely. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Because when you believe, "I just don't have enough," you stop asking a more important question. What am I doing with what I already have? In Buddhist thought, suffering continues when we avoid seeing reality clearly. And financial suffering often persists not because the situation is impossible, but because it is not being fully seen. The moment you begin to observe without judgment, something changes. Not immediately in your bank account, but in your awareness. You start noticing patterns that were previously invisible. You begin to understand that part of your situation was not only external, but also behavioral. And this realization, although uncomfortable, is what gives you back control. Because if the problem was only external, you would be powerless. But if part of it is internal, then change becomes possible. And this is why the second step of this journey is not about making more money yet. It is about removing the illusion that you have no control. Because once you see clearly how your reality is being shaped, you can finally begin to reshape it. The first day is not about changing anything yet. It is about something much harder than action. It is about seeing. And most people underestimate how difficult it is to truly see their own reality without filtering it, justifying it, or softening it to feel less uncomfortable. In Buddhist philosophy, this is the beginning of awakening, seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were. And when it comes to money, this is often the most avoided step because it forces you to confront details you have been ignoring for years. What the first day asks you to do is simple in theory, but deeply uncomfortable in practice. You sit down and write everything. Every expense, every small purchase, every repeated habit that takes money away from you. Not just the big bills, but the daily patterns that feel insignificant on their own, but become powerful when accumulated. At first, the mind resists. It says you already know. It says there is no point. It tries to protect you from the discomfort of seeing clearly. But as you continue writing, something begins to shift. What felt abstract becomes concrete. What felt small begins to add up. And what felt uncontrollable starts to reveal a pattern. This is the moment where many people feel a mix of shock and clarity at the same time. Because for the first time, the problem is no longer vague. It has structure. It has numbers. It has repetition. And once something becomes visible, it can no longer hide behind excuses. You begin to understand that part of your situation was not just bad luck or low income, but a series of small, consistent decisions that were never questioned. And this is not meant to create guilt. In Buddhism, awareness is not about blame. It is about liberation. You are not judging your past self. You are finally understanding it. And from that understanding, something important is born. Responsibility. Not as a burden, but as power. Because when you clearly see where your money goes, you are no longer guessing. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are stepping out of confusion and into clarity. And that alone changes everything. Because you cannot change what you refuse to see. But the moment you truly see it, change becomes inevitable. After you see the truth clearly, The next step is where discomfort becomes real. Because now you are no longer dealing with numbers on a page. You are dealing with habits, attachments, and small pleasures that have been part of your routine for years. And this is where most people hesitate, because cutting something is not just a financial decision, it is an emotional one. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering is deeply connected to attachment, not just to big things, but to small, repetitive comforts that we use to cope with daily life. A coffee in the morning, a quick purchase to relieve stress, a habit that feels harmless but repeats every single day. These things are rarely questioned because they feel deserved, almost necessary. But the second day forces a different perspective. Instead of asking, "Do I enjoy this?" you begin asking, "Is this helping my future or quietly taking from it?" And that question alone starts to change the way you see your own behavior. You are not asked to eliminate everything, because extreme restriction often leads to failure. Instead, you are asked to choose consciously, to identify a few patterns that are clearly draining your money without giving real value back, and to interrupt them completely, at least for a short period. This is where resistance appears. The mind immediately tries to negotiate. It says you need this to relax, that it's too small to matter, that life is already hard enough. And in a way, the mind is right. These habits were never really about the object itself. They were about emotional relief. That is why letting them go feels uncomfortable, almost like losing something important. But what you are actually doing is not losing. You are creating space. In Buddhism, letting go is not deprivation. It is liberation from unconscious dependency. When you remove a habit that was controlling your behavior, even in a small way, you begin to experience something new, a sense of control that was not there before. And this is where the shift begins. Because for the first time, you are not reacting automatically. You are choosing. You are interrupting a pattern that has been running for years. And even though the financial impact may seem small at first, the psychological impact is enormous. You begin to realize that you are not as trapped as you thought, that you can say no, that you can change your behavior, and that your future is not defined by what you used to do, but by what you decide to stop doing. After you cut what is draining your life, something unexpected happens. There is a gap, a space where the old habit used to exist. And this space can feel uncomfortable at first, because you are no longer numbing yourself in the same way, no longer following the same automatic patterns. But this is exactly where real change begins. On the third day, the focus is not on earning more, but on keeping what would normally disappear. And this may sound simple, but psychologically, it is one of the most powerful shifts you can experience. For the first time, instead of watching your money vanish, you are holding it. Even if it is a small amount, it represents something much bigger: control. In Buddhist philosophy, this is the beginning of awareness in action. You are no longer just observing your life, you are interacting with it differently. You take what you did not spend and you separate it, physically or mentally, from the rest. Not as extra money to be used later, but as something untouchable, something that represents a new direction. And at first, this can feel almost irrational. Your mind will tell you that the amount is too small to matter, that you should use it for something more urgent, that saving such a small value makes no real difference. But this is not about the amount. It is about breaking a lifelong pattern of immediate consumption. Because when you keep even a small portion, You are no longer someone who spends everything. You are becoming someone who retains. And that identity shift is the real beginning of change. By the fourth day, however, another challenge appears. Removing habits creates emptiness, and emptiness, if not handled carefully, pulls you back to old behaviors. This is why Buddhism does not teach only detachment, but also replacement. You do not simply remove what is harmful, you introduce something that supports your growth. Instead of spending on something impulsive, you create a new routine. Instead of reacting to stress with consumption, you find a different response, something that does not cost you your future.
This could be as simple as preparing something at home, walking instead of escaping into distraction, or creating small rituals that give you stability without draining your resources. What matters is not the specific action, but the intention behind it. You are teaching your mind that relief does not have to come from spending, that comfort does not need to cost you progress. And slowly, this begins to rewire how you deal with discomfort, which is one of the deepest roots of financial struggle. Because most people do not lose money because they need things. They lose money because they are trying to feel better. And once you learn to feel better without spending, everything changes. At some point in life, especially after many years of struggle, people begin to confuse kindness with sacrifice. They believe that saying yes to others, even when it harms them, is a form of love. They help when they cannot afford to help. They give when they are already lacking. And they carry responsibilities that were never truly theirs. And slowly, this pattern becomes one of the silent reasons why they remain stuck. On the fifth day, the challenge is no longer about money itself, but about boundaries. And this is where the transformation becomes deeply emotional. Because saying no is not just a practical decision. It confronts your identity, your relationships, and the way you see yourself in the world. In Buddhist philosophy, compassion does not mean self-destruction. True compassion includes yourself. It means understanding that if you are constantly giving from a place of imbalance, you are not creating harmony. You are reinforcing dependency, both in yourself and in others. This is why learning to say no is one of the most difficult but necessary steps. Because when the moment comes, it rarely feels simple. Someone asks for help. A family member needs money. A situation appears urgent, and your instinct is to respond the way you always have. To give, to solve, to sacrifice. And when you hesitate, guilt appears immediately, as if protecting yourself is somehow wrong. But this is where awareness must guide your decision. You begin to understand that every yes you give without stability is a no to your own future. That continuing to solve problems for others does not necessarily help them grow, and often keeps both sides trapped in the same cycle. And that protecting your resources is not selfish, it is responsible. This realization changes something fundamental inside you, because for the first time, you are no longer acting out of fear, guilt, or habit. You are acting out of clarity. You understand that if you do not build stability now, there will come a moment where you will not be able to help anyone, not even yourself. And when you say no, even with discomfort, something powerful happens. You feel resistance, but you also feel strength. You feel the weight of the decision, but also a sense of alignment that was not there before. And slowly, that guilt begins to transform into respect. Respect for your own limits, your own path, and your own responsibility. Because in the end, you are not here to carry everyone. You are here to learn how to stand. Once you regain a sense of control over what you spend and learn to protect your energy, a new question naturally begins to emerge. If you can stop losing money unconsciously, how can you begin to create more without exhausting yourself even further? And this is where most people make a critical mistake, because they assume the only way to earn more is to work harder in the same way they always have. But in Buddhist philosophy, effort without awareness leads to more suffering, not less. The goal is not simply to do more, but to act with clarity and intention. And when applied to money, this means looking at your life not just as a series of obligations, but as a set of abilities that can be redirected. By the 6th day, something inside you is already different. You are more aware, more selective, less reactive. And from this place, you can begin to see opportunities that were always there, but were invisible when your mind was overwhelmed and distracted. Instead of asking, "Where can I find a completely new path?" you begin asking a much more powerful question. What do I already know how to do that can be used differently? Most people underestimate the value of what they already know. Skills that feel ordinary to them can be valuable to others when applied in a different context. Cleaning, cooking, organizing, repairing, caring for others. These are not small abilities. They are practical, real, and needed. The difference is not the skill itself, but how consciously it is used. And this is where expansion becomes possible without chaos. You are no longer acting out of desperation, taking any opportunity just to survive. You are choosing strategically. You begin to test small ways of generating extra income, not as a risk, but as an extension of what you already do. And because you are now more aware of your time and energy, you do this without destroying your balance. In Buddhism, this reflects right action, acting in a way that is aligned, sustainable, and intentional, not rushed, not forced, and not driven by panic. And when you approach income this way, something important happens. You stop feeling like a victim of your situation and start becoming a participant in your own growth. Even small increases begin to feel meaningful, not just because of the money itself, but because of what they represent. You are no longer stuck. You are creating. And that shift from survival to creation is what opens the door for everything that comes next. By the 7th day, the most important change is not the amount of money you have saved or earned, even though that may already surprise you. What truly changes is something much less visible, but far more powerful. The way you see yourself and the way you relate to your own life. Because for the first time in a long time, maybe in decades, you are no longer acting on impulse. You are no longer reacting automatically to every discomfort, every request, every that once controlled your behavior. Instead, you have paused, observed, chosen and acted with intention. And that alone begins to reshape your identity in a way that is difficult to reverse. In Buddhist philosophy, transformation is never about a single external result. It is about the shift in consciousness that changes how you act moving forward. And this is exactly what these 7 days create. Not a temporary improvement, but a new way of operating. You begin to realize that your life was never as fixed as it felt, that even after years of repetition, change was always possible, but it required awareness, discipline, and the willingness to face discomfort instead of avoiding it. And once you experience this directly, it becomes very difficult to return to the previous state of unconscious living. There is also something else that becomes clear. You stop seeing money as something distant or uncontrollable. It becomes something you can interact with, shape, and manage with clarity. You understand where it goes, how it behaves, and how your decisions influence it. And this removes one of the biggest sources of fear, because uncertainty is replaced by understanding. But perhaps the most important realization is this. These 7 days were never about the 7 days. They were about proving to yourself that you can change your patterns, that you can interrupt cycles that have been running for years, that you can become someone who acts differently, even when it feels uncomfortable. And once that is proven, something fundamental shifts inside you. You no longer see yourself as someone who ended up here. You begin to see yourself as someone who can move forward from here.
And that difference, although subtle, is what defines everything that comes next. Because from this point on, your future is no longer a continuation of your past. It is a result of your decisions.